Dimag or Haath. I'm Bindu Manchanda from the Heritage Craft and Community Division. This is the division that works directly with craft people along with chapters to improve their livelihood and economic status. We are working a lot with women with displaced communities. We are also working with handicapped or special need people. The division was started, or let me say, was strengthened by our chairman, our respected chairman, Shri L.K. Gupta ji, and our member secretary, who have a very positive and very interested feel attitude for these craft communities. Craft, as you may know, is the second largest employer in India. Unfortunately, a lot of them have become laborers, or so they practice their craft occasionally. Uh, my the session is going to be moderated by Mrs. Ritu Sethi. She is the chairperson of the Craft Revival Trust and has worked tirelessly for years with craft people. On our panel, esteemed panel, and it's a very, very vibrant panel, is Mukund Bhogale ji, who's our state convener and is also spearheading the Kagzipura project. Mrs. Kataini Agarwal, who happens to also be a GC member and is also the lady who's reviving the Sanji craft. Mrs. Ambika Berry, Meyer convener and working extensively with craft people. And last but not the least, our youngest panelist, who is CEO of iTokri. I think everybody in this audience will know about iTokri. I'll invite Mrs. Ritu Sethi and all the panelists to the stage, please.
Thank you, Bindu. Chairman, sir, Vice Chairperson, Member Secretary, INTAC conveners, colleagues, and friends. On this momentous 3-day convention held by INTAC, I think one can safely say that this remarkable organization has not just lived up to the ideals and vision of its founders, but has been stewarded, expanded, and valued in such a dynamic way that it is a shining example of an institution of excellence, not just in India, but globally. As a member of INTAC's advisory on heritage, craft, and community, I know how much hard work is put into every aspect of advancing the aims and objectives of the division in particular, and of the ideals that INTAC holds. So it is a huge honor to moderate a session during this convention. So thank you, Dr. Mishra, and thank you, Bindu, for inviting me to do so. As we emerge from COVID-19, we are able to gather in these large numbers once again. And we are even more cognizant of the values imbibed in our arts and cultural practices and the very visible role it plays in India's culture. Besides, of course, its contribution to the country's GDP and indeed to its direct impact on more than 8 of the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to which India is a signatory. As everybody here is waiting to hear what my very illustrious panel has to say, I will not take up any more time, but dive in first. I will introduce each speaker individually before their presentation, and we will take questions at the very end of our session. So our first speaker is Mukund Bhogale, who is a highly respected industrialist based in Maharashtra. As a qualified chemical engineer, he also has a deep passion for heritage. He is INTAC's state convener for Maharashtra and is spearheading the Kagzi initiative.
Moderator Dr. Ritu Sethi, my fellow panelists and friends. I'm here to tell you the story of Kagzipura. Zil ke us par is how Bollywood would have described the location of handmade paper plant at Kagzipura. The story of Kagzis, the craftsmen from Kagzipura, is no less exciting than a Bollywood potboiler. They had their highs and lows. Kagzipura village, the small settlement on the banks of lake, had houses equipped with stone vats for grinding pulp and water tanks for storing the pulp slurry. The deft hands of Kagzis cast fine paper sheets of varying thicknesses. Some of the relics of this bygone era are still found in this village. House Nilam, the poetic name given to the lake, provides water to the village for their day to day needs as well as for the paper making even today. The tradition of handmade paper making in Kagzipura is 700-year old. The artisans of Kagzipura were some of the earliest paper makers in the country. They traveled 1200 kilometers from Delhi to Daulatabad with Muhammad bin Tughlaq in 1327 when he shifted his capital. But they chose to stay back and did not go back to Delhi when the capital was shifted back. They settled on the bank of a lake in the hills near Daulatabad. The place is now called Kagzipura. They have seen during this time the height of glory and the depth of deprivation. And this is a story about them. Amongst the customers, they had the royalty, the rich noble class, the calligraphers, the poets with royal patronage. And with such elite customers, obviously, they also enjoyed a certain stature or status in the society and the money that went with it. The prestige and high margins enjoyed by Kagzis eroded with time as use of paper got democratized and the new mass production techniques perfected by Europe spread to other lands. However, the demand for handmade paper continued to be robust and livelihoods were protected. It was towards the second half of 20th century that the demand shrank to a point, causing loss of jobs and hardships to the Kagzis. By 2010, the paper making unit hardly had any orders. Most of the equipment was worn out, and there were only handful of Kagzis who still came to the paper making unit, more out of habit than for work. When I visited this plant or paper making unit in 2010, what I found was stalled production, empty halls, stacks of unsold paper lining the walls. What was being lost was not just the 700-year-old craft practiced by the craftsmen in Kagzipura, but a craft perfected over 19 centuries by craftsmen that traveled from China to Arabia and finally to India. To understand this, we need to go back 1900 years. Paper was invented in China by Kai Lun in 105 AD. The essential process consisted of extracting fiber from plants, boiling them to make pulp, and then casting paper sheets from pulp slurry on a grass mat, which was mounted on a wooden frame. And then these sheets, wet sheets, were pressed to expel water and dried. Essentially, the process remains exactly the same even today in Kagzipura. Paper making technology was learned by Arab from the Chinese prisoners who were captured in attack on Samarkand in 751 AD. This art of paper making eventually spread to Europe and India in 12th century through the agency of Islamic rulers. How did Intact get involved with this project? In 2010, when I saw the state in which this paper making unit was there, I wrote an article in Virasat, which is Intact's magazine, on the craft and why it deserved to be revitalized. Nothing happened for several years. But in 2017, Bindu came to Aurangabad and was fascinated by this craft and decided to do something about that. It was through the agency of Chairman General L.K. Gupta and Katyayani Agrawal, that we got a generous grant to revive this art in 2018. The initial objective of intact objective in this project was to revitalize the handmade paper making craft for creating sustainable jobs and livelihood for the Kagzi community, and in the process preserving their pride. Because when we talk to them, this pride comes through, and it's important that they be not forced to work on brick kilns, and not have a job or a sustainable job in their own village. One of the first challenges was to create a brand identity for the Kagzipura paper, because otherwise it looks like any other handmade paper. The logo beautifully demonstrates the history, the skill, the quality that the craft stands for. We launched this logo in 2018. The efforts that we have taken so far have consisted of repair and maintenance of plant and building. We conducted 2 training workshops to add value to the paper and also bring in more Kagzis into the trade. We are at a stage where first commercial orders have started trickling in. But while we were doing all this, certain, 2 more modules got added to the whole project of Kagzipura. One of them was Lake Project. These are some of the pictures from the revitalized paper making unit, where you can see on the left the Kagzis preparing pulp in a pulp beater. On the top right, you can see women cutting the cotton waste and cleaning it for making pulp. And at the bottom, you can see them mending a glass mat on which the paper sheets are cast. Here you actually see a Kagzi casting those paper sheets on the grass mat. The paper sheets being dried on the top right corner, and at the bottom in the middle you see in a press they are expelling water from the wet sheets, and on the right the paper sheets which are dried now are being polished. One of the first workshops we conducted was to add value by making products from the paper, because selling paper sheets can only earn you so much. If we have to break even quickly, then you need to have value added products. The workshop actually got an enthusiastic response from the women from the village, and the workshop was conducted by Nilanjana Das in August and September 2021. Some of the products made during the workshop, you can see them here. But the pleasant surprise was that women already knew how to make some of these products. And the beautiful flowers, paper flowers that you see on the top right corner, were made by them without any training. They already knew how to make them. Some more products that were made during the workshop, and now these are all ready. We intend to have gift hampers which we will sell to the corporates as well as to the visitors, and maybe through a distribution channel. The next workshop was to use natural dyes in the paper making process. Again, a value add, because the process is entirely eco-sensitive, it's organic. So if we could also use natural dyes instead of chemical dyes, the whole perception of this paper sheet changes in the minds of consumer and the value perception, and we can fetch better price. The workshop was conducted by Mr. Ramesh Ramanandan in December 21 and January 22. In this 2-part training program, locally available plants and minerals were sourced, such as raw and dry turmeric, marigold petals, red clay, myrobalan or harda powder, pomegranate peel, katha, lime, etc. Participants were taught different methods of extracting dyes, which were mixed with pulp to make colored sheets. Many beautiful earthy shades were achieved through experimenting. These are some of the papers that were made during the workshop, and you can see the beautiful shades that we could get. The lake project came about because water is so integral to paper making process, but also it's integral to the life of Kagzis in the Kagzipura village, which also happens to be on the bank of this lake. We saw that the lake water was getting dirtied because of sewage which was directly flowing into the lake. Also the wash water, because women would come and wash their clothes on the bank of the lake, and that water containing detergent and soap would directly flow into the lake. So some of the components of lake project are tree plantation around the rim of the lake, treatment of wastewater before it enters the lake, construction of a ghat around the lake for the residents to have a clean access to the water, and watershed development in the surrounding area to ensure perennial water supply or availability in the lake. These are some of the works that we have already carried out. On the left, you can see the water treatment plant for sewage. It is filtered, the odors are removed, and the clean water is then let into the lake. On the right, you see the wash area, which is equipped with two natural filtration tanks under the ground, and the wash water will pass through these filtration tanks and then enter the lake. Museum project was a brainwave that came to us. We are in the business of promoting this paper, getting more customers, and a paper museum was an excellent way to increase footfalls to the water paper making unit. It happens to be on the road to Ellora. From Aurangabad to Ellora, when a tourist travels, Kagzipura is bang in the center. So there is a natural flow of tourists. All that it takes is to attract them to the paper unit so that they can buy paper products. The awareness is created and a sustainable, demand is created for this paper. The 5,000 square feet museum dedicated to the history, importance, and utility of paper may be one of its kind in the country. The museum's mission is to educate and disseminate knowledge about the history and journey of paper, its various making techniques with a focus on India, tools and materials used for writing, painting, and printing, and its various applications. The close proximity of the museum to the paper mill will help promote Kagzipura handmade paper and vice versa. As I mentioned, the paper museum is going to be located right next to the paper making unit. Both are on the bank of the lake, and this village is between Daulatabad and Khultabad, or Aurangabad and Ellora. The architect who came to the site before he started designing the building was inspired by the lines that the paper sheets make when they are being dried. He took that as an inspiration, reorganized these lines into walls which will contain the museum space. These are some of the 3D views of the paper museum building that we are about to construct. The building will not only house the paper museum, but it will also have space for a workshop where students and visitors will be trained in the art or craft of paper. It also has an open air cafe facing the lake, and it will also have a store for selling paper products. The next steps that we have planned are awareness building campaign for Kagzipura brand, create a distribution network for handmade paper. This is already underway. Build a sustainable critical mass of orders to make the paper mill self-sufficient. Train next generation of Kagzis, not just in making paper, but also supervising the production and managing the paper mill, because we want talent at all levels, and the idea is to get that, if possible, from the same village. Conserving one house in the village to demonstrate how paper was made historically in Kagzi houses, train villagers and create homestay options that can offer an authentic experience of a Kagzi home, and promote paper tourism. Some of the allied initiatives that we have taken up with the help of a corporate, their foundation, is to also educate the students from the village and youth from the village in the history of Kagzipura, bring about awareness about the history, the craft that they should be proud of. The next generation is not connected with this that much, and also undertake road building inside roads of the village, and if possible put the open sewer lines in underground drainage lines. So that will actually make the village more habitable and tourism will flourish. This is our expectation. The craftsmen from Kagzipura join me in thanking Chairman General L.K. Gupta, Director Arts and Crafts Division, that's what the earlier name was, they keep changing, Mrs. Vandana Manchanda, Governing Council Member Mrs. Katyani Agrawal, and intact volunteers Meher Seth and Azim Sheikh for their generous support. We also thank you all for giving Kagzipura story a patient listening. Thank you very much.
I have to say that what Mukund has told us is an amazing best practice and should really become a template, because it shows us that you go in thinking you're going to make paper and you come out reviving a lake, being inclusive in what you're doing and really bringing back culture that got lost. Thank you, Mukund. It was marvelous.